for me, the idea was fairly simple in the sense that once I understood that Satoshi had created some notion of digital uniqueness, it's distributable, it's natively digital, it's networked, everyone has the source code's there, all the records on the blockchain are there, it's all there, yet somehow there's this unique thing that one thing is mine and your thing is yours, and I can send my thing to yours and I don't have mine anymore. Was pretty mind blowing.
How are you?
Hey,
Hey, nice to see you. We are fine.
yeah, we're doing good.
Great to hear. Where are you? Where are you right now? Where are you based actually?
We're in New York City right now.
New York City. It's nice. So yeah, so happy to have you. I mean, we have so much to talk about. I'm very curious about your journey, right? You have been creating art for 3 decades, and that's amazing. And you have been breaking boundaries. You're also both are professors, right? You are a duo. You collaborate together, and you are breaking. I mean, you explore different mediums, right? Installations, video, software, and are also very present in the digital art space. And in 2014 you created quantum, right? That's a very interesting topic, the first NFT. I'm very curious about that and how it all went down. But let's maybe start from the beginning. How did you start in the art world? How did you start creating art?
Yeah, I think we were both interested in culture and ideas, and found our way from different paths into, visual art, media art. I was more of a theater film student and was thinking I might do a PhD in film studies. And Kevin was doing philosophy and thinking about that. And then when we met in France, and it was a really excellent year of seeing a lot of art and seeing a lot of moving image work. And we sort of slowly developed a practice
Mhm.
that was at first, kind of collaborative in terms of working on each other's projects. And then we started to co-author work kind of after graduate school.
Yeah, we were at first really interested in filmmaking, and sorry, especially experimental filmmaking, artists' film and things like that. That was really really a revelation. That's the word, revelation. When I first saw it, that these ideas, these really incredible visual ideas that artists had been doing for many decades in film. And so that seemed pretty interesting to us. And then we returned to the States, returned to the U.S., and thought about going to art school,
Mhm.
more directly, and then happened upon a really early and interesting program. Called Integrated Electronic Arts, which at the time, before digital art, before new media, before all those terms
Mhm.
were invented, there was not really a very precise name to describe these things. And so the idea of combining music and animation and video all together with these new tools that were happening was a pretty radical idea and pretty interesting to us. And so we ended up going to study at an engineering school in upstate New York called Rensselaer, and had a really great time working with musicians as well as with video makers and artists, using very early computer tools, and it was really fun. And so that got us going in a kind of hybrid
Mhm.
um, media way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've been interested in, artist groups like Art and Language and Fluxus. And, we're interested in this idea of both conceptual art and also live processes. And so, the way that, instruction based art and chance operations kind of flows into, generative work or algorithmically based work seemed appropriate
Mhm.
to both of those kinds of, interests. And also
Yeah.
just working collectively and collaboratively just felt like a really interesting way to make work that was, you know, um, I don't know, if you make work in conversation with another person, it's very easy to imagine then the conversation being, extended to potential viewers and audience members. So
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing made sense.
And then when we came to New York in the kind of mid to late '90s, and there was a lot. It was a very small community of kind of art and tech people at the time, and there was a lot of people working in groups and collaboratively in pairs or three people or something like that. And so there were some that aren't really active anymore, but were doing amazing work. A group called Fake Shop was doing really amazing early kind of video, kind of telepresence video and installation work.
Mm-hmm.
There was a group called Electronic Disturbance Theater that was doing really interesting work, a place called The Thing, a group called MTAA. And so us working collaboratively was seemed pretty normal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that sounds very, very, I mean, exciting. I can imagine like back those years, it was a very, like very uncommon path, right, for an artist. And how, I mean, back then, how did you distribute your work, your art? Is it it was video, it was also, you mentioned some sort of installations and performances. So how was it distributed back in the 90s?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and it really varied, and so there were different, I guess, different kinds of venues, different types of things. And so we were doing a lot of live mixing and VJ work at the time, working with different experimental musicians and kind of post drum and bass kind of thing. And I had written some software, written a bunch of kind of tools that I was using in doing that. That was really fun. And so there were things that were, kind of explicitly performance based. And then there were things that were like film festival kind of things, but they, kind of media festivals. And then in that case, you might be showing a kind of video tape or video clip kind of thing. And then there was the art world, the gallery, meaning the gallery world. And, in those contexts, you had to turn the digital work into a thing somehow, right? It had to be maybe a print, but that never really seemed that, interesting to us. So that's, we went in this kind of like installation and sculptural direction when we were, exploring or interfacing with the art world. And then and then, in addition to all that was this kind of idea of net art, which was, being developed at that time. And kind of was a really exciting kind of concept. And that's artists making their own websites, that are funny or conceptual or
Mhm.
aesthetic or explore narrative or all of these different strategies of artists making their own
Mhm.
space online.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess those websites weren't really like useful in the sense that nobody was going there to get information. Those were more like, yeah, art, right? Like trying to convey a message, and they were, I guess, kind of,
And it was, and I think that they were confusing and hard to understand
yeah,
in that way, right? Because it's like, they were really funny or strange
yeah.
or weird. And
Yeah, but we had a history of working with even before NetArt, there were, CD-ROM projects and things where artists were doing interactive, projects that were an aesthetic, object that was a CD-ROM. And there's, a professor at Cornell, Timothy Murray, that we've worked with who, has like an entire collection of artist CD-ROMs at this Rolls Goldstein collection archive. And so, we had been working with musician Peter Gabriel, kind of right out of school on an interactive project, and with videos like Sledgehammer, and he was really interested in animation and thinking about how digital art could be this like interactive like nexus between audio and visual art. And so working with Peter and thinking about that, those were all sort of formative experiences that were very much about like creating a space that was more exploratory than a museum or a gallery, even because you could open up this website and not really know what it was or how to navigate it. in the way that a museum always announces itself as like this normal place, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
door and there's a person, and I look at the art and I don't touch anything, you know, and it's all, you know, more or less expected. So we were really interested in, you know, how you can explore through a virtual environment, you know, pretty early.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that, I'm glad that Jen mentioned that, you know, because we you know, for almost 2 years worked with Peter Gabriel, both, you know, in the States, and then also in England at his studio there. And it was funny because it was great, really amazing. He's an amazing musician, and the people that kind of came through the studio were, you know, really interesting, really wonderful musicians and artists and things like that. It was also frustrating in the sense that we really were wanting to do our own work, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, or it came to this point where we're like, what do we want to do? You know, do we want to, you know, be in this kind of role and kind of help these, you know, kind of big name artists, or do we want to develop our own voice and see
Mm-hmm.
what happens, see where it goes? And so eventually we chose the latter, and kind of left and went to do other things. But the experience with working with him was really significant because it really showed what, there was an ambition to what he was doing, and there was a kind of level of quality and visual richness and engagement and depth that that was, you know, that was in that work. And I think that was very helpful for us early on to see that level of engagement and to really push it. You know, somebody who really was wanting to push it, and
Yeah.
that was a very helpful kind of experience lesson
Yeah.
early on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now that you mentioned collaborations, I'm curious about your way of collaborating, either with other artists, musicians, but also when you're working on a project. Do you have like, how is it? Like, you have a specific task? Is it like one of you is more on the software, on the coding, one is more on the video and editing, or the idea, or it depends on each project? Each project, is it different?
Yeah, I think each project is really different. I mean, I do think that we both have to like the idea to keep working on it, although there has been moments when somebody sort of says they're not interested anymore but works on it in secret, and then the idea is like, look, it's really great, I told you.
Yeah.
You know, and so there is a little bit of that. And Kevin certainly has, you know, he's self-taught, but certainly, you know, has gotten, you know, a bunch of projects that we needed to coded, you know, himself. But we also bring in programmers sometimes to, you know, extend our reach a little bit. So yeah, it doesn't really break down very neatly. You know, like I hurt my little hand doing a project last year, and Kevin was like, I thought, oh, you know, now we can't do it. And Kevin was like, actually, I can do the rest of it. So,
Yeah.
you know, we shove things back and forth, and, you know, it's a big sort of life work balance. But I also think that having two people, you know,
Yeah.
at the helm of things is just useful. So yeah, I don't know. It's not a clean break, but I think that that certainly we're both, you know, hands on in different ways on every single project.
And you know, we realized coming out of grad school that the media art and tech art world was very small, especially at that time, and we didn't want to be in competition with each other. And so, you know, we just didn't think that was a healthy way for us to live and to function. And so there was a sense, you know, so that idea of collaborating took that problem off the table, you know, and then opened up this new set of possibilities. You know, you really have to be willing to invest and commit to this third body of work that's not mine and it's not hers. It's a kind of new thing that neither of us would have done exactly had we been working, you know, ourselves. And so that, you know, now over time, that seems, you know, pretty second nature to us. But it's fun. It's fun to, and
Mhm.
it's interesting to kind of see that third
Yeah.
thing happen.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I'm sure it's not easy to, been working together for such a long time. I'm sure many duos at some point, couldn't continue for one reason or another. So, but for me, it's very impressive that you have been able to collaborate in so many projects, right, across the years, and changing mediums. So that's very impressive. And we tackle a bit about your beginnings, right? How you got started. You've been exhibited internationally, right, in many museums. You also are part of collections like the MoMA, right, the Met. So that's I'm wondering, like, when did that start? Like, when were you starting to get, okay, let's go to this show, or you were getting calls, hey, we want to
Yeah,
exhibit this? Was it like a slow
kind of.
process?
It's a pretty interesting story, really. I mean, and it starts in 2000. We thought that we wanted to we wanted to interact with the gallery world, with the art world, and so we had been, we had a sort of casual relationship with a gallery here in New York called Postmasters that has been doing, certainly technology-based things, but more than that, just really interesting projects for a long time. And they, gave us an opportunity to do something with this hole in the floor that they had in their old space, and we built a miniature, kind of 2 foot tall, functional elevator that came up and down through that hole, and opened the doors, opened up, and this voice would speak to you, and then it would close and go down again. And a project called Pink Light, and that was really, it was a good, it was a big, jump, a big leap to try to build
Mhm.
that and pull it off, and it worked out really well. So that started this relationship with the gallery, and then the next idea that we had was to work with. We had this idea that we've been in our minds for a couple of years of turning narrative stories into databases. How could that transition happen? We saw just around us this age of narrative, call it, film and TV, and even kind of books before it, seemed to be ending, and this new era of algorithms and databases seemed to be emerging. So how can you take this old thing and put it into this new context? And so we had this idea that we could take a TV show and break it up shot by shot and classify each shot that we saw, and then we could make categories of all of the shots that represented that any given
Mm,
category. And
okay.
so that we started that in 2000. This is 5 years before YouTube launches, and before Final Cut Pro, or it's like, this was extremely difficult. You couldn't burn DVDs then.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
yeah.
Yeah,
it was
and the
crazy long time.
computers barely would process video, so
Yes.
So it was
yeah.
it was kind of a crazy idea, but we pulled off this pretty nice project, where we worked with this 70s television show from our childhood called Starsky and Hutch, which is this police drama, that
Hmm.
really kind of cheesy now, and even then it was pretty cheesy, but well known. And so it was this kind of had an autobiographical component, in the sense of, like, we had this connection to it, but it had this kind of presence in the world, and it was a genre piece, a genre story, police adventure story. And so we made this project where we made these players that were kind of in this suitcase, kind of inspired from our VJ days, this gear kind of kit, and then this giant collection of video CDs, 278, each with these different labels on them. Um, every apartment exterior, every carpet,
Hmm.
every zoom in, every gunshot, and each disc was shot after shot of just that specific type of project,
Mm.
of film,
Yeah.
of clip. And that project really galvanized a lot of attention. It really was one of those things that put its finger on something that was about to happen, or that people could feel in the air, and it kind of crystallized this kind of
Hmm.
vibe for a lot of people.
Yeah. So I guess long story short, before we even really had a solo show in a gallery, we had sold that piece to the Met.
Yeah. So
Okay.
the first artwork that we ever sold was selling that piece to the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Yeah.
It
So
was
for a
just like-
while we thought,
it was just
oh,
like,
the art
what?
world is really easy. What's everybody complaining about?
I don't
Um,
know about that.
What's the name? What's the name of that piece? The name of that
called
piece?
Every Shot, Every Episode.
Okay. Every shot, every episode. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was,
That was
interesting.
pretty crazy.
And we had a lot of early success with those things. And then, the problem not problem, but the challenge becomes like, well, how do you move your ideas forward? And is it always that you need to have that level of success to think that the idea is worth doing? Or do you go your own way? Which, going back to your introduction, is, one reason why, teaching has been a great sort of way to do that. You're always there, you're talking about the ideas, but if you want to try something that isn't as packageable for the gallery to be able to find a buyer for, you can still do your work. And so that's been that's been the priority, is like, how do you make your situation such that you can, work on the ideas that are interesting and exciting for you, and not make your art practice into, a product or a factory.
Right. And I think that the best way to showcase that is when you work on quantum, right? Because it was, again, it was very revolutionary. And I wonder, can you tell us a bit about that story? Because it was in 2014 when the term NFTs that didn't exist, but right? It was, how did that happen? So you were trying to find ways to distribute a digital object, and you came with this
I
idea.
mean, it was not, it didn't start as a solution to a problem. It started as a question, a kind of thought idea. And I'd heard about, and it connects directly to Bitcoin, and I'd heard about it in 2010, like a number of like, old timers with this post that appeared on the tech blog Slashdot, but didn't really pay attention to it. But I remember at that time, and then learned about it again in the fall of 2012, and then started getting into it. And then, in 2013, the first half of it, I was, reading the white paper and trying to, really understand it, looking at the source code, and then being involved with the the crypto online community at that time, which all took place in mostly in one forum. And, and it was just this, explosion of different ideas, people talking about all these different kinds of things. Not a lot, very little art stuff, almost no art stuff. People were not thinking that way, at least, very much at all. But, for me, the idea was fairly simple in the sense that once I understood that Satoshi had created some notion of digital uniqueness, it's distributable, it's natively digital, it's networked, it's, everyone has the source code's there, all the records on the blockchain are there, it's all there, yet somehow there's this unique thing that one thing is mine and your thing is yours, and I can send my thing to yours and I don't have mine anymore. Was pretty mind-blowing. And then once that idea was, once I kind of understood that, it was this kind of simple step for me. It was like, well, could you make a digital artwork do that? Could an artwork have the same types of properties that Bitcoin has? And then the question was, how would you do it? But then also, what would that object be? What would that thing be? It would be a new kind of thing. And so that was, and then, and I kind of had that idea in the fall of 2013 of like thinking about how that could kind of come together. And then, usually in artists' lives, it's deadlines that, that drive you forward. It's like, the show's coming up. You got to get this work done. Stop messing around. And so the art organization Rhizome had this, we were friends with them, and, they were part of this, community that we were in. And, they knew I was thinking about these ideas and talking about this stuff just informally. And they invited me to present it at an event at the New Museum in that fall. And so that was like, oh, okay, I guess we've got to I guess I'll kind of do it. But I didn't arrive with it. I arrived with it all mapped out, but I hadn't made anything.
It was conceptual. It was the theory behind it.
Kind of map. I had the map in my mind. It's like, oh, okay, we can do this. Is how we can do it. And then with that conference, the form of it, the conceit of it is to pair an artist with a technologist. Cold. Just put them together. And they paired me with Neil Dash, and and he'd be the first to admit that he's not like a hardcore coder guy. He's he has an amazing career. He's an incredible person with this amazing overview and all kinds of experience. But it was really the right kind of experience, and we really, kind of hit it off. And I just said to him, I've got this idea for digital ownership of digital artworks using blockchains, and he's like, sounds great. And the first thing that we did was to try to come up with the name. What is it? What are we talking about? What is this thing? And that was this hilarious conversation that where we came up with this term and this concept of monetized graphics. These are monetized graphics, and that became monograph for short. And that was our name for it. These are monographs. But spelled with an E, because MONO, monograph in the art world is a book about a single artist. So it has this kind of singularity idea to it. And MONE has this kind of money component to it. So it was monetized graphics. And so in that context, I made three works over that time, and he was he provided these incredibly critical components to that. He knew how to build a web page really fast that could function. So we could have a tool that worked, and how to deploy it. And, my knowledge on that would have been slow and, halting. He knew about data structures. That was a very important component. But most of all, he was an amazing communicator. And so we were able to put the story together on stage that really walked people, kind of through the process. And so, there were three works created at that time: Quantum, the Cars, and another piece called Primordial Loop, which draws from a net art piece that we made in the 90s. So it was an attempt to kind of bridge those eras together.
Right. No, that's quite an exciting story. And then this happened in 2014. And I was reading an article, I think it was on NFT Now. And it kind of, you were put on the spotlight back in after 6-7 years, right? 2021, 2020, when NFTs started to become popular. But this was 7 years after, right? And I believe it was the original concept was minted on Namecoin. Is that right? That was an old blockchain that's not really operational anymore. Is that the case? It's operational.
Yeah, it's operational. Yeah, I mean the in the time after that, I was attempting to move the monograph idea forward, and for several years, was building that concept, and had a group of people that I was working with, and we really built the first platform, that launched in 2015, where you could, again, these are later day terms, but we didn't use these terms at the time, but you could mint, you could buy and sell, you could collect, you could display stuff on a smart TV. We had a mobile app, iOS and Android app. So there's all this stuff, but there were no users, and there was certainly no sales. So
it was too early.
Yeah, and you forget. I mean, it's like all the things that you take for granted now of the vertical integration that the Ethereum ecosystem has built, and the web wallet, the connected web wallet with Ethereum, all those things. So it's like, take away all that stuff, and it's pretty
difficult to
pretty
buy and sell
difficult.
anything.
But,
Yeah.
but more than anything, people just didn't understand it, did not understand the idea. It's like, what is,
Yeah.
and it was a kind of variations of the right click save question, and that really, it really confused people.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Even today, right, can be a little bit tricky, right? Many of my friends and family, they still don't understand it quite well. So what do you do with these things? Um, but no, that's really exciting. And then this artwork went Quantum in particular went to an auction, right, with Sotheby's. When was that? How was that? Have you been? I mean, how was that experience, right, to be auctioned at Sotheby's for a digital item? Was it different? Were you live in the offices in the auction house, or was it all fully digital? How was this experience?
It was digital, yeah. So they approached me, and learned of this kind of early experience, that I had, and they approached me about a sale, and but more than the sale, it was this kind of a context, right? It was a good
Yeah.
context to bring that work forward, bring that story forward, and I wasn't present. Well, I mean, it was a week-long auction, right? And then everything started at, you know, a low price. I think everything started at $100, with no reserve. So it was really just like, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And it played out over a week, So, but it was intense. It was it was crazy. I mean, we've had experience in the art world, but not with auction houses. So that was we've had certainly primary sales and secondary sales, but the auction dynamic, and was new, and
Yeah.
that was intense.
Yeah, it was. I can believe it was intense, right? Because I believe it went over $1 million, right? That's kind of a great way to start. Again, like your first time with a museum that collected your work, and then again with this auction, right? Like a very big auction. So that's pretty impressive. Um, and when you started creating art, like when we were mentioning that you were to art school, that you collaborated, did you have in mind to at some point be at Sotheby's or Christie's in one of these auction house? Was that one of your goals, or you had this idea, or that was
No, not at all.
impossible impossible
I
to
mean,
think about that?
no, I mean, I like thinking about these different ecosystems that art can function in. I think that, that art's meaning is somehow also related to how it moves through your society. So it's interesting, but certainly as, for me, first, a filmmaker that making experimental work, like you pretty much just hope to make the next project is the goal. So yeah, no, it's not
Yeah.
not a goal, and really not a part of the art world that our immediate circle really deals with all of that much. It's much more about like interesting people globally that turn up to galleries and museums and maybe lectures and panels and that kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, and there's plenty of, it's New York City, so there's plenty of of places to do art without thinking about the sort of larger systems that are global that way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the money, the money is important. Money, makes the whole world possible, and auctions are, the auction houses are, a significant component of that. But it's just this tiny part of the art world, and it's just not that. I mean, you could think of like artists that were really, Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons, living artists that really were making marketability, something that was part of their, practice in some shape or form, and that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
and the execution of their work, at the level that it was. Matthew Barney probably fits into that category to a certain extent, and so that auction, and especially Damien Hirst, was innovating, with all these like primary sales directly through the auction house, all this stuff that was, it was okay. It was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that interesting, and
Yeah.
it's not that dynamic,
Yeah.
so it was not really a place where we thought that our ideas were going to be, doing all
Yeah. No, and you mentioned that in New York City you have plenty of options, but now also in the digital space. I mean, you have been part of a Feral File exhibitions, also
Yeah.
expanded.art, which is with Annika Meyer, which by the way was the how we got in touch. So thanks a lot, Annika, for the
Yep.
introduction.
Yes.
Um, so you have plenty of options these days, right? You can do it the traditional way, right, with galleries. New York City, you have different options, but now also these digital experiences, right? And do you see yourself like, I mean, how has it changed, let's say, your practice maybe, or the way how you approach
Mhm.
your practice, your art, now that you have these fully digital experiences that weren't possible before? Has it affected the way how you approach things and how you create
Yeah.
art?
I mean, I do think that, like, particularly Land Sea Sky, which had, like, 300, lower priced things that were like a set price that could go out to a lot of different people. I mean, it's been pretty amazing to kind of travel, say, to Berlin and run into people who collected that project.
Mm-hmm.
And, your reach is just a lot more extended if it's a little bit invisible. So it's like, with a gallery show, it's high visibility. You may even meet the person who collects the work and it's in the room, but there's not that many of them. Or, with digital, it's a little bit more like a movie ticket where the price is somewhat more accessible and more global in reach. So
Mm-hmm.
I like that, but it is pretty funny because I feel like in the art world, since our work sometimes has like a sense of humor or a sort of accessibility, that I think for the art world, people are like, oh, it's really engaging and accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the same ideas in the digital work are like, oh, it's so complicated and abstract, so
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting thing to like communicate to, you know, those audiences. And
Okay.
now I'm sure you've sort of, seen, and I'm sure Annika and I talked about a lot, these audiences are really coming together
Yeah.
where, people who were just interested in sort of digital collectability
Yeah.
are learning a lot about art really fast and are learning about the history and starting to, kind of get the bug of like
Mm-hmm.
how ideas connect to each other over the centuries, which is,
Yeah.
the most interesting part of art.
And that has been just, that has been an amazing part of this, this wave, with NFTs and over the last 3 or 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
really, broke kind of broke out into the world, um, is a whole new type of person was collecting and invested
Yeah.
in collecting and
Yeah.
invested in thinking about artworks, and engaging with them. And so many different kinds of artists were brought
Mm-hmm.
into a community and brought
Mhm.
into a dialogue that they weren't before, or would have had a hard time doing before.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of like what we were just talking about, out of graduate school where there were all these media art festivals, and we were kind of, one of our main ways of showing was like mailing, a
Yeah.
VHS screening copy of a video.
Yeah.
And, these days coming out of art school, a quick, entry level is to just, put up your stuff on a
Yeah.
blockchain and tell all your friends about it.
Right.
So it's interesting that emerging artists keep finding networks, and I
Mhm.
guess that's the commonality there.
Yeah, and I mean, in your because you we mentioned briefly that you're also teaching, right? You're professors, and so do you see like your students, are they open-minded in general about blockchain art? Is it something that they are interested in more or less, or what are the How do you
It's
feel about the newer generations?
it's it's mixed, and it's hard to make generalizations. It's certainly the case that the kind of massive scale of frauds
Uh,
that came to light in spring and fall of 2022
yeah.
um, really affected the whole enterprise. And I it's like, as an old timer, it's like I've certainly seen plenty of frauds and bad actors. But even I was kind of surprised and shocked a bit at the scale, at just the truly epic scale of
Yeah.
it. And and then it was clear after the fact that all of the kind of frothy money hype was just kind of created out of this kind of circular trading of
Yeah.
kind of marginal tokens. And so that had a big impact on everybody, including students and young people. So
Yeah.
that sense of like, oh, NFTs are just a scam. You can't. It's harder to say, no, not necessarily, when all of that stuff is happening. But that said, students are interested in a lot of different things, and they're also skeptical of a lot of different things. They're skeptical of blockchain. They're skeptical of AI. They're skeptical of
Mm.
VR, and they're also engaging with those things. So I think that what I see with the younger generation, college age kids, is a they understand the two-sided coin of technology,
Mm.
and so they've experienced plenty of downsides of it, in their just their kind of psychological lives or whatever, and so they're nuanced, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And I do think that, if they were worried about NFTs and blockchain, that has been completely eclipsed by being afraid and worried about AI.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, yeah. I've heard about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, not without reason, as Kevin is saying, but,
Mm-hmm.
I think that what we're here to do in our, various teaching jobs is to sort of say you can be really critical and use that in your work, and yet still try to use the tools that are relevant to people today, and, try not to be in a position of fearfulness where you want to experiment, so anyway, I don't know how these ideas will play out in all of their work. And I really, obviously it depends on the individual person. But I
Mm-hmm.
do think that like there is still a space for people to be interested in software and code-based art, and not engage with blockchain. And I think
Yeah.
that's totally happening.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. I mean, I see a lot of creative coders, right?
Yeah.
And they are not touching the blockchain, right? They are creating either plot art or prints, or they use creator digital art. But yeah, they don't engage necessarily with the blockchain, and that's also the case with AI art, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Many people. I mean, it's very easy now to enter the AI art world, and some are just doing it for fun, right? Just to experiment. But yeah, it's not, even if it's there and it's a possibility, I still think it's a little bit complicated, right, for anybody to mint on the blockchain. And as you mentioned, there are some drawbacks. But yeah, we'll see how it evolves. In We mentioned your show with expanded.art, and I'm very curious about that one. It's machine organic. Can you tell us a bit about that, the concept, how it came to be, and what's the concept behind machine organic?
Mhm.
Do you want to start?
It's very complicated.
Well, I mean, the whole show really kind of makes a claim for, how does the eye deal with complexity? How does the computer deal with complexity? How does nature deal with complexity? And so we kind of, try that, we try to explore that in, video and in drawing and in digital code. So the three things are kind of knit together. And so, the forest and the trees as like is the basis of all the work.
Like subject matter.
The
Yeah.
subject matter, right?
Yeah.
The theme of everything. And then the different media explore it in different ways. Yeah, it was really interesting. We had a residency in Maine at a place called Reach Projects, which was very helpful to kind of, work this through. And we have a plotter that handles code as its input, but then the output is, whatever material you want to use. So, there's works in the show that are India ink, there's acrylic paint, there's charcoal, and there's ballpoint pen in terms of drawing output. And we also, Annika was very helpful in that, the core of the show are these, I think we showed 11 projects that the buyer gets both an NFT, so they get the digital version and they get a drawing. And the interesting thing is to look at the difference between those two outputs.
They're not the same.
And they're not the same. They're just the code basis is the same, but the output is vastly different.
Yeah.
So it was super experimental that way. And, and it was really, kind of a great time to do this, where it's like, who is interested in NFTs and what are we doing now with that? And, what kind of, what kind of collector has this like, broad understanding of, the way code is manipulated, but also how it's, resolved. So those kinds of ideas really inspired the exhibition. And we're still working with those ideas, potentially on more of an interactive installation next, about this idea of the forest and the dark forest of, of cryptocurrency, and how to sort of visualize, possibly being inside of that as a viewer. So anyway, it's bouncing around in some creative ways.
Yeah, I love that phrase that emerged, to describe the mempool of transactions that aren't yet verified. Calling that the dark forest, and the whole emergence of MEV, minor extracted value, or what's it called now, maximum. So there's some softer name for it, but originally it was minor extracted value.
Sounds like a punk band from DC.
Yeah.
Like the miners, the value they get from mining, right?
Yeah. Where they can front run a trade or reorganize the transactions in such a way where they can kind of snipe all this way in which the miners as validators and as block builders can game the system in a way. And so that idea, that idea in theory is present in all blockchains, public ledgers in some shape or form. Some are much, that risk is much more minimized in Ethereum because of the robustness of the contract language and the ecosystem. It's much more of an issue, and of course that's well understood in that community, and various kind of sophisticated approaches to it. But the name is always just so great. The dark forest, the mempool is the dark forest, and so that's a that's a kind of mythological like title, kind of a fairy tale, idea. And so there's a lot of resonance to that idea, both in a digital world and in a kind of physical world.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And would you talking about mining, right, and the impact in the environment of Bitcoin and also Ethereum, right? Until the merge, it was also a proof of work, right? So this kind of this technology has an impact on the environment, and I was very not surprised, but it was, I think, the first time, and maybe there are other artists that are doing this, but you have an eco let's say approach, right, to your art, where you are trying to what's the name, like the emissions, right, like
it's a strategy of of trying to of mitigating, just kind of being aware of these things and trying to create some kind of mitigations.
Right.
Again, a long time ago, I was interested in these ideas that go under this heading of permaculture, these kind of different approaches to agriculture and to building that think about all the energy flows that happen
Hmm.
on a, say like a farm or a piece of land or something like that, and building and designing things that take advantage of those things and
Yeah.
kind of recirculate. Now, a lot of those ideas go under the name of regenerative agriculture and things like that. So the that idea of accounting for, of identifying and accounting for resources and
Right.
kind of where they go and how that energy is transformed is
Hmm.
something that I think is really interesting. And blockchains really, I mean, blockchains are so amazing. It's so great in which they create essentially this kind of small version of very complex things, almost like a
Yeah.
toy version, of financial things that people like you and I never had any kind of exposure to, but they're fundamental to how the world works. All of a sudden, here's this version of it that's built on this public ledger, some kind
Right.
of derivatives thing or a loan thing or insurance thing or
Hmm.
whatever, and so
Fractionalization.
yeah,
Yeah.
fractionalization, right?
Yeah.
And so you can participate in those things and in doing so get an understanding of them, and so blockchains have just been so amazing to see. I'm certainly not alone, and so many people have had that experience of exposure and understanding of systems in the world through this technology. And so I think that the that thinking, kind of thinking in this larger ecological
Yeah.
way almost seems natural to people who are thinking about crypto stuff. I think
Yeah.
that is
It certainly
systems
became part of the,
systems thinking.
yeah, and becomes part of the
System.
conversation, really quickly. And, for us as artists, like the minting is so small, but
Mhm.
the idea of the crypto as a whole system is, a larger idea. And we wanted to really try to figure out, well, what is the part you play? And obviously before the merge, that is, a much different thing. But also, there's like political, there's chains that are, have to deal with, political issues as well
Yeah.
as environmental ones. So we're just trying to like, as good conceptual artists from the past, like trying
Hmm.
to figure out all of the different, spheres of inquiry that, choosing one tool over another
Right.
engenders. Mhm.
Yeah. And like this, how hard has it been for you to understand like the impact and maybe make a plan and actually execute the plan
Yeah,
for
I mean, these things are very difficult. They're
yeah.
surprisingly difficult to model.
Hmm.
You know, to model it, and the thing also is that it keeps changing, right? You can
Yeah.
kind of like have this sort of conception of like, okay, here's the way things work, and you can make these assumptions, but then the market evolves, and this is especially true in Bitcoin mining, which the kind of like kind of short story of like, oh, proof of work is bad, and kind of the merge and proof of stake, solved a lot of problems. I mean, that merge was incredible, and it's like
Yeah.
an incredible human achievement in and of itself. But even Bitcoin mining is just changing drastically with
Yeah.
all of this, kind of flare gas based energy and all this kind of
Yeah.
load balancing that's happening with it. So it's um,
Very
all
hard
very
to
complicated.
estimate. Yeah.
You I mean, I guess we just apply kind of art thinking where it's like, okay, this is how we kind of sketch out the landscape, and this is kind of our draft, our drawing, and then you
Yeah.
make a decision and say, okay, we're going to try these things,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah,
that's
and
it.
it's a work in progress.
Yeah, it's not easy, but it's great to have that approach, right? And to
Yeah.
put it out there that people, their collectors, other artists see these kind of initiatives. I think that's the main uh, win, right? For to have this in mind. I think that's the most important thing.
Well, and
Um.
just to add on that, we really what what really galvanized us to act in that way
Mhm.
was was talking to the Sundance Film Festival, and it's one of those great situations where different communities come together and new ideas come out. It's productive,
Yeah.
and the Sundance community was just very had a very negative take on
Uh,
the environmental components of blockchain, and it
yeah.
really made us go, okay, we need to
to do something,
We need to
right?
try something. We need to try
Yeah.
something. Now, but what was also interesting is we then posed a question to them, which was, do you do energy audits for the films that you show? What is
Mm,
the energy profile and resource consumption profile of the movies that you saw? And that
right.
was like something that had never occurred to them at all. It's like, oh my gosh, what
Yeah.
So it was fun to kind of hold a mirror up to that too, not in a kind of like gotcha way or whatever, but it's like
No, but also
it's
a mirror, a double mirror, in that we then thought, like, how often do we need to fly internationally? What if
Yeah.
we like think about that, like all the other parts of the project that aren't about, a gas fee.
Hmm.
What are the other gas fees, like towards like
Yeah.
going to Berlin or Korea or any number of
Or
other.
shipping the artwork, right? And if it's a big
Absolutely.
installation, yeah.
What
Oh,
happens to the crate,
yeah.
like all of the things. So yeah, we're trying to figure that out, as is, our many people.
Yeah. No, that's a very good, very good initiative. And for everybody that's listening, you can see it in the McCoy site, right? You can see that it's stated there in their next to their
yeah,
projects,
the energy plan.
Mhm.
the energy plan. Yeah, that's very exciting. Um, so we're coming almost to the end, and it's been an hour. Very fascinating. Thanks so much for sharing your journey and your experience and your takes on the digital art space. But usually, I like to ask this question to everybody that's in the podcast. So, who are three artists that inspire you?
Mm.
Could be digital artists, could be
Oh
physical from
yeah.
the traditional world, but three names that inspire your work.
Okay. I actually read your preparatory
Oh, you
notes. Thank you
prepared? Oh
so
my
much.
gosh.
But while he's thinking, I can say mine. Um, I would say the artist and composer Robert Ashley,
Mm.
who's a musician composer that died, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe now, with really beautiful work that always pushed boundaries, and really was both conceptual and narrative, and yet made a sort of like amazing space for just transforming the room and the
Hmm.
atmosphere. So one of my favorites. um, and then I would also say Andrea Fraser, who's like an artist that does a lot of performance and institutional critique and looking at systems and the way that the world works.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of hers. And you wanted three, right?
Yeah, I mean it's a number, but two
Yeah.
is also
These are
good.
artists that I just am an Instagram fan of,
Okay.
but they also are a collaborative duo, I think, from
Mhm.
Finland, or no, from Lithuania, excuse me, called Pakui Hardware.
Okay.
And it's just like the weirdest, coolest, like body horror kind of sculpture.
Okay.
And I think they might be in the Venice Biennial for Lithuania coming up. So we're hoping to maybe burn some fuel and go in June and see the work.
Nice. Nice.
But yeah, those were my three.
So yeah, I'll riff on that, and I think a name that I often give, and it's similar to Robert Ashley, is Pauline Oliveros, another amazing composer, and she passed away about 5 or 6 years ago. But we worked with her extensively in grad school, and it's just an amazing um, holism in her thinking, just so complex and so complete in the way she thought about things, and trained your attention to pay attention to details, and to have those details start to resonate. So she's just really amazing. And then just two digital people I want to kind of give a shout out to.
Mhm.
Raphael Rosendahl, who's
Mhm.
known for a long time,
Yeah.
and he is. I just really love what he's doing with his distributing his works on his own site. Kind of starting in he did all kinds of net art stuff and some really amazing innovative work with net art around owning net art, and of course his style is
Yeah.
so wonderful. But how he's kind of brought the whole art blocks concept onto
Yeah.
his own site, and is now kind of releasing the work that he wants, when he wants to, how he wants to,
Mm.
is really the ideal. It's really the crypto art ideal that he's managed to get there in such a fundamental way. It's awesome. And then I'm going to give a shout out to Pac. It's like his works in 2021. It's like the sophistication and just
Yeah.
and scale of those works, and the kind of, they're funny and they're conceptual, and they're just great. So it's just like,
Yeah.
hats off to
And
Pac.
the mechanisms, right, that he implemented and was very like, yeah, innovative, right? Now we see those and we say, okay, yeah, burning, right, or
Yeah,
transferring. But when you think about it, at
super
that
innovative.
time was very, very impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fantastic list. 6 amazing names. Everybody that's listening, all the names that were mentioned and all the collections will be in the description, so you can find the links. If you want to look at the artists, the collections, also the ones we mentioned from Kevin and Jennifer. And this was great. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time. I hope you had fun, and maybe we can do it again sometime in the future.
Anytime. It was wonderful to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet
conversation.
you. Really, really enjoyable.
Yep.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, keep in touch.